Andy, you're in the place to be right now in California covering the Club World Cup. How's it been so far for you?
Yeah, good. Obviously, in between working on the tan, which is easy to do at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena because there is no cover whatsoever. I'm not generally in favour of being behind a glass press box, but it does have its advantages, I suppose, in this situation. It's been really interesting. It's just such an unusual tournament that I think not just the players are getting to grips with, but the public as well.
Yeah, David, are we getting to grips with it here? What's been the highlight of the tournament so far for you before we go back to Andy on this?
I don't think it's coming across really well, if I'm honest with you. I think there's a few little aspects. Well, I say little aspects. There's a few big aspects there that continue to grind people's gears. I think the attendance has been one particular issue that has come up a lot, and I think it hurts the product, what you're watching, and then just generally just long seasons. We've watched a lot of football, and there's an overriding feeling that perhaps the quality isn't there.
Yeah, talking about that long season, I suppose, Andy, there aren't very many teams who've had as long a season as Inter. Obviously, losing to PSG in the final of the club. Well, PSG, but I should remember there aren't many teams who've had as long seasons as PSG and Inter, is what I should really be saying. But Inter, of course, lost the Champions League final, and now they're in the Club World Cup. Do they still have much to offer, or are they running on empty?
I mean, I think you made a really good point, because it feels as if the season is longer for Inter because they ended up winning nothing. And of course, they were absolutely battered in the Champions League final. So I think for there to be a sense of weariness, particularly when their performance in the Champions League final gave the impression that there was nothing left to give. It was always going to be fascinating to see what they did in the Club World Cup. Now, I'm coming fresh off seeing them play their opening game at the Rose Bowl here in Pasadena against Monterrey. And they couldn't have played a team that set up more smartly, I think, than Monterrey. Now, they were being asked a lot by the Mexican media beforehand about the class gap between European football and Mexican football. But they're coached by a guy, Dominic Torrent, who used to be the assistant to Pep Guardiola at Bayern, at Barcelona, at Manchester City. He's got loads of experience in European football. And their plan to soak Inter and then counter-attack them later in the game when they sort of got a bit tired, I thought was a pretty sound one. They had a bit of luck of Inter missing big chances, which was reflective really of Inter's season at a whole. I mean, it's difficult to jump to too many conclusions because, of course, we're assessing as well the debut of Cristian Chivu as Inter coach. And he's in a sort of similar situation to the one that Vincent Kompany was at Bayern last season, like partly because of the chronology of Inter's season. When Simone Inzaghi left, they were kind of left in the lurch. You know, a lot of the musical chairs, as we were saying, in Serie A coaching positions had taken place. They were left with less options than they might have been. They end up getting Chivu, who has got something to recommend him, of course, because he's coached the age group teams at Inter, did a really good job in the back end of last season at Parma, stopping them being relegated. But as far as being a top coach, he's inexperienced. He's less experienced than Kompany when he took over Bayern. So I wonder, even if the players are not exactly jazzed to be here, and we spoke to Henrik Mkhitaryan afterwards, and he looked like he was going to fall asleep standing up, basically. And he said, well, you know, we have to try and be positive and try and find some energy from somewhere. I'm like, well, right, okay, well, that's not a great recommendation, is it? Of course, he's one of the older players in the team, so I'm sure he'll be feeling it a bit more. But from Chivu's perspective, I think to get used to what he's got and like see the bits in the team where he thinks, okay, that could change a little bit. Because that Inter performance, I don't know what you thought, David, but I felt that was an Inter performance that, even if you factor in the tiredness, it could have been an Inter performance from various points in the season, in that they're comfortably the better team, they create enough chances to win the game with some ease, and yet they don't manage it and look quite ragged by the end.
Yeah, 100%. I think Kivu said that like basically they fell into the trap quite a bit for the way that Monterrey set up, and it did feel like a bit of a continuation of how Inter finished the season under Inzaghi. And the positive is, I would say that what they do need to improve upon is quite clear and actionable.
Yeah.
I think if you look at, I think it was 15 shots they created and they had on goal. 15 shots they had on goal. So you'd think, and they are identifying a brand new striker. So I noticed they were being strongly linked with Boni from Parma. So there's one thing. Another thing is, which I found this quite interesting, Inter were the team with the fewest successful dribbles in Serie A last season. Now they've brought in Luis Enrique, so you'd think he'd be somebody who can action that. And then they've made a clear switch to a zonal marking defensive system as well. And quite a few players talked about this after and said, look, this is something we're going to have to get used to. So it feels like the bits that they do need to improve upon, they're very well aware of.
And can you see, or is it too early to judge Kivu based on this opening gambit at the Club World Cup? Or can you see what the new Inter, the rebuilt Inter, is going to look like, Andy? Do you get a sense of that at all?
Well, we saw a few little tweaks. I mean, like David was saying about the zonal marking. The zonal marking is fine until you're trying to pick up Sergio Ramos from a corner. I think that's the difficulty, yes. Really. And yes. Of course, it was funny because they explained afterwards the idea was zonal marking, except when you're picking up Sergio Ramos. But of course, we saw him having that back and forth before the corner that came in from Oliver Torres that he headed in. He was having the back and forth with Francesco Acerbi, who's obviously very experienced, only a little bit younger than Ramos. And I'd love to know what they were saying to each other. Presumably Ramos was going, well, you can try and defend me if you want, but we know it's completely pointless because if I want to get the header, I'm going to get the header. But I think in terms of them trying to carry the ball up the pitch a little bit quicker, maybe they rotated for freshness. Maybe the idea is they get a bit younger in the centre of midfield. Of course, no Hakan Çalhanoğlu in this one. And Çalhanoğlu's been brilliant for them. And if you're going to move on from someone, I think you're probably moving on from Mkhitaryan rather than Çalhanoğlu, even though there have been those links with Galatasaray. But I guess that's the thing. This is sort of put on Kivu. But the fact is, if Simone Inzaghi had stayed, he would have had to do a mini rebuild as well. I think the way that they caved in the Champions League final was just a sort of accelerated expression of where they are. The fact that this is a team that's coming to the end of a cycle, or this incarnation of the team is coming to the end of a cycle. And maybe Inzaghi simply didn't have the appetite for that. I think we've got to consider that, as well as having like an absolutely humongous pay rise in Saudi waiting for him. And in that sense, fellas, maybe Kivu's the perfect pick. So even if he's kind of ended up with a job semi by default, having someone who is known for development of players and has really helped Inter in that perspective. He's worked with a lot of the younger Inter players, of course. He's not done that thing that coaches do when they leave teams and say, "Oh, I won't take any of the talents with me." As David said, they're looking at Boni, who again I think is a good player who they could develop into a really good one. And I think it's been clear over time. We've felt as if Inter have had good depth, but actually, when Thuram and Lautaro miss time, and they'll miss time again next season because they're just flogged relentlessly, and at some point they need a rest. Maybe Kivu is the guy to do that.
I'll tell you what, David, there'll be listeners thinking, was Andy having a laugh when he said Sergio Ramos? But he wasn't, was he? Sergio Ramos scored the Monterrey goal out of, as you can expect. We've mentioned the corners already, but out of almost nothing. What can we say? Can we say a line about Sergio Ramos and his newfound lease of life in Mexico, of all places?
Yeah, it was an interesting move, but if you look at that Monterrey team, there's a couple of Spanish players who have gone there as well. So there's a nice little group, and it's a nice transition for Spanish players as well. So the language, the lifestyle, there'll be a lot of similarities as well, but it's like a lot different to European football. So yeah, I quite liked it. It's nice that a lot of these players have gone out to Mexico.